Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I'm going to show you a quick art journaling page. So to start with, I'm actually using a page out of this journal. This is actually a Bristol board journal. It actually has removable pages. So you'll see that I can actually remove the pages and actually put them back in, which is really nice when you're actually art journaling, because in this case, I can actually have a nice smooth flat surface to work off of, and I don't have to worry about being too close to the edge, it bleeding over on other pages. So it's a really nice solution when you actually want to try to keep your art journal looking a little bit neater and a little bit tidier. So basically I took my piece of art journaling paper and I actually have put washi tape around it just to fasten it down and make it nice and square. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually use this Distress Oxide ink to create my background. So I'm starting with a ink blending tool and my Distress Oxide ink. And basically what I want to do is just do a very soft circular motion across the page. And basically just cover the entire background with ink. And you want to do it in layers, so you start with a very thin layer, and then areas where you actually want a little bit more color, just continue to add additional layers of color. And if you don't know exactly how to use the Distress blending ink, I have actually done another video that I've referenced below that you can take a look at as part of my Creative Foundations class to be able to understand the technique of actually getting a really good blend. So once you kind of get a layer of color across the whole thing, then you start coming in and adding a little bit more color. I'm actually adding it a lot more along the bottom. I do like the idea of a gradation that allows it to be a little bit lighter up top. I like the idea that this is sky, so by adding a little bit more ink, you end up with a little bit more variation, so not everything is the same intensity of color. I'm going to add another little ink blending tool with a foam, and I'm actually going to add a little bit of broken china along the bottom. Again, this gives it a little bit more variation in color. What I really like about the Speckled Egg is it goes really well with some of Tim Holtz's other Distress Oxide colors. I find that I really like how it marries with other colors so well. So it's become a bit of a go-to for me as I work, just because of how well it blends. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is start adding a little bit more to this background. I'm going to add a stamped image. So the stamped image I've decided to use is actually part of this stamp set, the Faded Type by Tim Holtz. And so I've actually decided to use the script for this particular project. So I'm going to add the black Suit Archival ink. Ink my stamp very well. Let's try to make sure you're nice and square. And so that's my first print. And then I'm going to actually go and add additional stamps. The reason for this is I'm looking to try to get different color values. So you can say first stamp, second stamp, third stamp. You can tell this third stamp, the second stamp there, it was a little over the edge, so I actually ended up with a little bit more intense color here and a little less intense color here. So something to, again, watch for as you're stamping. So I like being able to use black soot ink, but then this way you actually do have a little bit of change in color, so it's not all the same intensity. So the next thing I want to do is try to add some more interest to this background before adding our focal image. So in this case, my focal image for this project is this Springtime Geo by Tim Holtz. Little thin lit dies, and I've actually cut out a bunch of these. This is going to be one of my focal images, but I also want to make this as part of my background image. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to color these similarly to I'm going to use a speckled egg to color these to make them a little bit more similar to the background. And then what I want to do is adhere these on to the background. And by doing this, you add more texture. You bring in kind of the theme that you have for the page without it being too many images on the page. So before I adhere them, I want to add some speckled egg ink to my images. I would usually move in a circular motion, but in this case, because these things are so fine, I'm a little bit worried about just damaging them. I like coloring these before I adhere them. Technically, you could color them after, but then you may end up bleeding over into your background in a way that maybe isn't exactly what you're looking for. So our next step is to actually adhere these images to the background. And I'm using PPA glue, and what I'm just basically doing is just rubbing it across the image to try to get it to be sticky enough to stick. Another way you could go about this is if you were actually die cutting these yourself, if you had those adhesive sheets, you could basically just cut these on those adhesive sheets. So instead of having to glue every single one individually, you could basically make them almost into stickers and then adhere them much easier than the way that I'm doing it here. But I don't happen to have any adhesive sheets with me, so this will do. There's always a workaround. So as you can see, it adds a little bit of texture, it adds a little bit of interest to it, but it's not really detracting from what you'll be doing with your main image. So you want to let this fully dry, and just so that it's not sticky before you move on to your next step. The next thing you actually want to do is worry about your focal image. So in this case, I actually do want to have another hummingbird on this page, but I want it to be quite bold. And so what I have here is a piece of Yupo paper that I have actually used alcohol inks to color. And it was as interesting a background for doing an actual background for, but I thought it would make a really good color choice for doing this project. So I'm trying to decide which colors I actually want to show through. I think I'll go this way. And you'll notice that the tail's hanging over top, but that's okay because I only really need to cover anything that is seen through the GeoGrid. So in this case, I'm also going to paste this one down. And you want to set that aside to fully dry. So once this is fully dried, the next thing you want to do is actually add a stencil over top. I would have actually, if I was doing this again, I would have actually done the stencil before adding the birds. But now that I have added the stencil, we're just going to run with it this way. I'm just going to add a little bit more layers of color. This is going to be a very subtle effect, actually. Again, it's very, very subtle, but you can see a little bit of the pattern there. And again, the whole point of this is just to try to add a little bit more subtle texture. Again, we're not going crazy with adding huge amounts of color or really vibrant color. I tend to be a vibrant color person, but in this case, I'm trying to do something a bit more subtle. Add some interest, add some color, and just kind of have it kind of work with what I already have going. So there you can see where you have a little bit more interest from that. And again, this is still using the Speckled Egg. This is the same color, but again, the more layers you add, the more intensity you get. So by adding those layers of intensity, you end up with something like really kind of special. And I'm going to add just a touch of broken china in a couple little spots. Again, trying not to go too heavy with this. But again, if this is supposed to be the ground, it's just trying to add a bit more texture in there to make it look a little bit deeper. So the next thing we want to do is cut our hummingbird out of the Yupo paper. I'm just using an X-Acto knife and a cutting mat. I like using an X-Acto knife because you can get a much tighter line with these. So now I've cut on this hummingbird. I'm just going to lay it on my layout like this. I purposely left a little bit of space between these hummingbirds, so this one would have its own space, so that these would fall a little bit more back into the background. So now I'm going to be using my Zots. These are basically glue dots to attach my hummingbird. So now that this is attached, you might notice that there are some of the wings that are going over top. I do be very, very careful when you do this. I'm actually going to cut to the edge because what I've done is, because I am actually putting a tiny little, I taped this off so there's a tiny little frame on it. I don't want to exactly go to the edge, so I actually do want to cut these off a little bit before the edge, and so I have to be very careful not to cut my silicone mat while I do this. So I'm trying to be very careful with my pressure, but I am trying to actually cut this off so that when we're done, we actually have a slight line. This meets up with where the ink ends, and then we have a very slight border on this project. And again, generally I would be using a cutting mat for this, but because I've actually tape this all down to my silicone mat, I'm just being extremely careful with the amount of pressure that I put to make sure that I do not damage my silicone mat. There you go. So now these should actually leave you with a tiny little bit of a border, and it cleans up the look of it a little bit. So the next thing I want to do is add my phrase to this page. In this case, I wanted to talk about the idea of being brave. When I read a lot of Brene Brown's books, she speaks a lot about the idea of being authentic and about being vulnerable and willing to put yourself out there. And that's not the easiest thing to do in this world of ours. I find I have moments of just feeling like, instead of putting myself out there and being friendly and being outgoing, sometimes I get kind of shy and kind of withdrawn, not because I really want to, because I'm just a little bit afraid sometimes to be seen. And I think there's something said about being seen and being vulnerable that the people around us really need to see. And so I like the idea of being brave and having the courage to be seen. And that's what I am putting as my reminder to myself, that it's not always easy to let people see you for who you really are, but at the same time, that's the way you touch people in a really honest way. And I really do believe that's something that we shouldn't hide in our lives. It's something that we should really embrace and realize that there might be fear in that, but that's also where some of the best relationships and the best friendships come from. Those moments where we are willing to reach out and have courage and be brave and to be seen in this world. And so I'm going to go and paste down these letters, and then I'm going to add some of these stickers. I have these Tim Holtz Ideology stickers that I would like to use for this, and then I will add those in between these ones to complete my phrase. going to take the tape off so you can kind of see it completed. I wanted to do one final touch on this, and that is to actually add some Distress Stickles and some liquid pearls. So I have Worn Lipstick Distress Stickles, Pastel Raspberry Liquid Pearls, and these Cotton Candy Stickles. And the reason I want to add these is I kind of want to have a little bit of flow to bring your eye down the page here. So I'm just going to add them here. You just put little dots of these. And I try to make them into little designs as well. I really like the idea of being brave in our own lives and finding ways to be the person we need to be and not apologizing for it all the time. It doesn't mean we can't consider other people's feelings, but there's also something to be said about finding ways to be vulnerable, finding ways to connect with people in a really meaningful manner so that we can be a blessing to others as well as be able to let ourselves be seen in our own lives. At some point, we need to make a decision about what we want our lives to look like and what's important to us and how we're going to let people affect our lives and what we actually want from the time we have. Maybe it's been through some of the things I've been through where I've really had to think about if I died tomorrow, what would that mean? And I don't want to live my life fearful. I don't want to live my life feeling like I wasn't seen in my own life or that I didn't make the decisions that I wanted to make my life better. So there's something to be said about actually taking the time and having the courage to be who we need to be. So now I've added the stickles. If this may be what you would like to add to this, you can also use pen marks. You can use a lot of different things to kind of get this effect. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and maybe provide a comment below on what you liked about this video. And let me know if you have any questions. As well, I have my website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other projects on how to find self-care in a creative way in your life. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.